Hi guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to recommend some dark autumn reads that I think are perfect for this time of year. If people are looking for kind of seasonal reads, things that are really good for October, November time, and things that are autumny, a little bit spooky, a bit dark, a bit gothic, a little bit of horror. First three books I want to recommend are all classics, and they're all kind of like staple classics that you would expect to be recommended to you at this time of year, but I just couldn't not include them. The first one is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I couldn't not put this in here. I love Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I read it for the first time last year. I actually would love to reread it this year because it is just has all these spooky, autumny, kind of cold, windy, you know, by the sea, mystery, gothic, ghostly type of story. If people haven't read it yet, I would definitely recommend picking it up around this time of year because it's a really great time of year to read it. And the new Netflix adaptation is coming out soon as well, so it's the perfect time. I also really love Dracula by Bram Stoker. I mean, it's an absolute classic for Halloween time, but I was really surprised when I first read Dracula at how much I enjoyed it, and I think other people will be too. I think it's really easy to read classic. It's also one that has some really fabulous kind of audiobook narrations, as well as like abridged kind of dramatic like radio dramatizations of it. So if you didn't even want to read the full book, I would definitely recommend reading some sort of like radio adaptation of it with different people doing the voices, because that would be really, really fun. You can even find them on YouTube, and if I do find a good one, I will leave a link down below. I wanted to include the picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is also a really great kind of chilling type of mystery classic. We are following someone who has almost sold his soul to the devil so he can keep his youth, but he is reminded of all the dark things that he's doing and how his soul is slowly being poisoned and slowly rotting inside of him through this picture. There's just something so kind of spooky about Dorian Gray. You never really know what he will do to keep his secret, and you see him hurting people that he really used to care about, and you see his personality change. He really goes from this kind of naive, innocent boy to this absolute monster by the end of the book. Some of the other books I have on this list include Elmet by Fiona Mozeley. This is just a beautiful book that I think is really great for autumn time, because there's something about this book that kind of reminds yourself of like looking back, and there's this like kind of reflection kind of feeling in this book, because we are being told this story by this boy, and he's telling us the story from his childhood in this kind of present time where he's not living a great life. He seems to be in a bad place, and he's looking back at this kind of the summer and the autumn of his life, and with his sister and his dad, and things that happened to them. And they were living in this land, they were living in this little house, and they were living kind of with nature and by nature, and it's just a beautiful book in terms of reading about nature, and particularly around this time of year. There's just a lovely autumnal atmosphere to the book as well, and I just really recommend it. And even it's a great one for your shelves as well, because it has a very autumnal kind of look to it. After the Silence by Louise O'Neill is a book I recently read and I have a full book review for, and this is one that is perfect for this time of year because it is a true crime / mystery book. We are following this documentary crew as they interview these people of this island about a murder that happened 10 years previously that was never solved. We know that there are people keeping secrets on this island. Again, we are on this island off the coast of Ireland. It is misty, it is rainy, it is dark. People have all these types of secrets that they are keeping that they don't want to let these strangers know about. And there's just definitely something kind of creepy and chilling about this book, because you don't know what these people are hiding. You don't know what has actually happened to the young girl who was found dead 10 years ago. And it's definitely one of those books that you could just like curl up with a blanket and a cup of hot chocolate or tea and probably read in almost one sitting, because it is so good. I also want to recommend A Natural History of Dragons by Brennan. This one I just think is really good because there is a journey that's taken in this book to a land that's very similar to maybe like an Eastern European country like Slovakia or Slovenia, and we are in like the mountainous area. It is a little bit cold, it's a bit damp. The characters in this book have to get used to the different change in weather. A lot of descriptions of the nature around them when they're in this place. They're trying to find these dragons to study as well. I read this one during the summer, but I think it would be a really nice autumn read as well, because again there's just so much lovely kind of descriptions of nature and animals and dragons in it as well. The Mercies by Kiran Hargrave is a really great book to read it for this time of year, particularly around maybe the end of autumn coming into winter, because it's definitely one of these books that almost makes you feel cold in a way because of where it's set. This is kind of focusing on this part of Norway where the men in this community were all killed in this big storm, and the women are living on their own, and we are following as this priest comes to this community to try and kind of almost quell the women in a way. And it's focuses on these real witch hunts that happened in Norway around this time as well. And we are following this other character who comes from the city. She marries this man who is investigating this community of women. And she comes with this man to this community, and she has to figure out how to like live the way of life in this village as well. It's very cold, and they have to learn how to, you know, like build up a fire and live with this cold and live with the constant wet and the wind. And this amazing community of women, a few women in particular who become really, really close to her. And there's something about this book as well, as I said, the atmosphere and the weather, that is just really great for this time of year, and curling up and feeling warm while reading a book that is a little bit wet and cold. House of Salt and Sorrow is also a great book to read around this time of year, because not only is it set in this also a similar type of setting as the Mercies, where it's somewhere that's kind of cold and wet, seaside coastal town, and we are following this almost like gothic slash horror story of this family where the daughters seem to be dying off, and it seems to be like there's this curse that has descended upon this family where all the daughters are dying. Following one sister, she is trying to figure out what is really happening to her sisters. Why do her sisters keep dying? Is there like a curse in the family? Is there someone who is trying to kill them off? There are some really kind of ghostly scenes in this book that aren't like dissimilar to things that you might see in something like The Haunting of Hill House, which comes to mind because I started rewatching it yesterday. But there's that feeling of like creeping through this like old house with all these rooms and not knowing what's going to come out, what you might see around the next corner. Perfectly Preventable Deaths by Deidre Sullivan not only has like the most perfect like autumny cover, but the story itself is kind of dark and mysterious and chilling in so many different ways. This is a book. In this book we are following these twin sisters as they travel to this new village with their mother, who is recently remarried, and while one sister discovers that she may have the ability to be a witch, the other sister falls in with this mysterious character who poses a lot of danger. This book has a lot of gruesome moments in it. There are some really kind of shocking moments of violence in this book, and shocking scenes of like a grisly nature that really kind of shocked me, but it is so engrossing. It is so good. It's tense sisterly bond in this book where one sister really wants to protect the other, but the other doesn't want that protection. And it's really hard to read about at times, but it is the most perfect book for this time of year, particularly if you want to read it deeper into October around Halloween time, where you just get that kind of feeling in the air. I really recommend this book. This is one of, if any book you read for this time of year from this list, I definitely have to say to try and pick this one up, because it is really, really good and just absolutely perfect for Halloween time. For a thriller, I have picked The Whisper Man by Alix North. This is a really like creepy thriller. It's one that I felt very kind of that kind of goosebumpy, chilling sensation when I was reading it, because we are following a person who appears to be killing children, and appears that he somehow shows up in the middle of the night and starts whispering to these children in the middle of the night. And there are some scenes in this book that are just so creepy. There are scenes where like a child is like at the door thinking someone is talking to him through the letterbox, and it is just the most creepiest, one of the creepiest scenes I've ever read about in a book. I just had the absolute goosebumps when I was reading it. I think I was reading it like in the middle of the day, but I found myself feeling kind of jumpy. There are just some really great moments in this book like that give that type of feeling that I think is really great for this time of year. The Warlow Experiment by Alex Nathan is one again that is a little bit psychological in nature. It's not a thriller, it's more of a literary fiction, and we are following a man who takes this experiment on. He basically employs this illiterate farmer to live completely on his own in this basement for a year, and he's basically seeing what happens if a human has absolutely zero contact with the outside world for a year. But he fails to think about the type of like mind he's already employing into this, and we kind of follow this man as his mind kind of gradually turns against him as he is kept on his own in the dark, what it does to him and how it has really, really negative effects to the house, to the person who's doing the experiment, to this man's family, and how it has these like long effects afterwards. Kind of feeling of this book where you were kind of watching madness descend upon this house, upon these characters, and it's like there's definitely that kind of chilling, creepy feeling about that. And for people who want maybe something kind of psychological in nature, but something that's not like terribly scary, I think this one would be a good one. The Sawkill Girls by Claire LeGrand is also a really great book to read for this time of year, because this one is quite scary and is quite horrific at times. We are following a few different girls on this island, and it appears that there are young girls being killed by this mysterious monster on this island. No one has figured out what is happening to them, and one of these girls' sisters ends up being taken, and she has to try and figure out what exactly is happening. And it's almost like a deal with the devil kind of thing. This really horrible creature coming for these girls with this horrific appetite for young blood, and Again, there are some scenes of a grisly nature in this book. Want something that's a little bit more grisly in nature, this one might be good. And it's YA as well. It has some really great representation well that I quite enjoy, one that I listened to an audiobook as well if you're looking for an audiobook. The Queens of Ithaca Lear is also a book that just came to mind when I was thinking about dark autumny reads. This is one that, again, it just reminds me of the earth. It reminds me of rain and cold and wind and, you know, your bare feet in the earth, that kind of feeling this book gives me. Basically it's like a retelling of King Lear, and we are following these three sisters as they battle each other and battle themselves internally. There's like a lot of political intrigue in this book, but I think it's a great one to read around this time of year when the weather has gotten a little bit colder and might reflect the weather in the book. Anytime I think of kind of spooky autumny recommendations, I always think about the Silent Companions, because this is just the perfect book for this time of year. It is gothic, it is creepy, and there's no like big jump scares in this book. There is just this kind of cloying sense of this unease throughout the entire book, this mist that like descends and makes the characters go a little bit paranoid and a little bit mad. Absolutely perfect for this type of recommendation and for this time of year. And the last book I want to recommend is Beloved Poison by E.S. Thomson. This is a book I've talked about before, and it's one I actually really want to reread because it's a book that I want to revisit and I want to read the rest of the series as well. So this is a book that's kind of a historical mystery book, and we are following a character who is living beside this infirmary. They are an apothecary, and they basically kind of find these kind of baby graves that are empty, and there seems to be something weird going on about this, and the character ends up investigating this, and it turns out to be something connected to the hospital and to the infirmary and to the operating theatre within this infirmary. One of the best things about this book is we are following a character who was born physically female but who lives their life as a man, and there are some really great kind of internal conversations with the character around their identity, around this trans identity at the time, and around maybe a gender fluidity they obviously can't really talk about, because at this time, this is like in the 1800s or so, and obviously they can't live their life, their true life, can't be completely true about who they are, and there's this like constant kind of fear of their secret being discovered as well. But I remember really loving the character in this book and how they are portrayed in the book, but also just the mystery in general and how they investigate the mysterious nature of these empty graves and what is actually happening and how it is connected to the hospital that they live beside. So those are all my dark autumn reading recommendations. If you guys have read any of these books, please let me know. If you guys have any recommendations for me, please leave them down in the comments below, as I would love to know more books to read for this time of year. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye!